Chapter 11 continued. The Ring of Fire. Some independent thinkers and scientists believe that the Ring of Fire is waking up and becoming more active. The Pacific Ring of Fire is a 25,000-mile, 40,000-kilometer horseshoe-shaped seismic belt, or arc, home to 452 volcanoes, and is an area where large numbers of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions occur each year. The belt expands from New Zealand through the eastern edge of Asia, swings north across the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, then moves south along the coast of North and South America. The Earth crust is divided into giant rafts of rock, called tectonic plates. The theory of the plate tectonics indicates that the Ring of Fire is located at the borders of the Pacific Plate and other major tectonic plates. The crust and upper mantle of the Earth, the lithosphere, is formed by various plates, and these plates interact, collide, and slide underneath one another. These massive movements release enormous power and energy, and generate major disturbances on the surface of our planet. This type of movement in the plates is known as subduction, and the nearby area that generates the volcanic and seismic activity is known as the subduction zone. About 90% of the world's earthquakes occur in the Ring of Fire, and as we entered the second decade, the frequency and intensity of these quakes was on the rise. A number of factors could be coming together to create this phenomenon. However, this is all observation and scientific speculation. But the evidence is clear. We have entered an active period of seismic activity. Worldwide disasters, the opening years of the 21st century. The following is a list of some of the worst natural disasters of the early 21st century. Many are regarded as the worst catastrophes in modern history. Without warning, many regions in the world were severely devastated by crippling disasters. This is the broad nature of the economic X factor. The Indian Ocean 2004 earthquake and tsunami, the wave that shook the world. December 26, 2004. Also known as the Sumatra-Andaman earthquake. This massive quake resulted in the death of over 230,000 people in 14 countries, wiping out entire towns and villages along coastlines of these nations. With a 9.1 to 9.3 magnitude, this quake was one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. Scientists tell us that the force of this quake was more powerful than all of the earthquakes of the previous 5 years, and that the energy released on the surface was comparable to 26 megatons of TNT, or the equivalent of 1,500 Hiroshima atom bombs. Scientists also tell us that this earthquake was so strong that it caused the Earth to wobble about 2.5 centimeters in its rotation, and that it ruptured the greatest fault length of any recorded earthquake, spanning a distance of 900 miles. It had the longest duration of faulting ever observed, between 8.3 and 10 minutes. The epicenter of the main earthquake was approximately 100 miles in the Indian Ocean off the western coast of northern Sumatra, at a depth of just 19 miles below sea level. As a mega-thrust earthquake, this massive force would displace billions of tons of water, setting in motion a dreaded tsunami traveling up to 500 miles per hour to the nearest coastlines. Nearly 100-foot waves, enormous walls of water, devastated countries with little or no warning of the coming catastrophe. There was no tsunami warning system in place, and these densely populated areas were totally unprepared for what hit them. In just 15 minutes after the earthquake, northern Sumatra was struck by the first tsunami wave. Thailand was hit 1 hour after the quake, and tsunami waves struck Sri Lanka and India 1 hour after landing in Thailand. Banda Aceh, Indonesia, suffered the heaviest casualties and destruction. 170,000 people lost their lives, and many more were injured. One observer that toured the city after the destructive earthquake and tsunami stated that it was like the aftermath of an atomic bomb. Over 45,000 people would lose their lives in Sri Lanka and India. When it comes to natural disasters, flooding has proven to be the worst in terms of causing the most damage and death. Hurricane Katrina, August of 2005. Packing winds of up to 145 miles per hour and labeled a Category 5 hurricane, Hurricane Katrina quickly became the deadliest and most destructive Atlantic hurricane of the 2005 hurricane season. Up to that point, it was the costliest natural disaster with total property damage estimated at $81 billion. It destroyed one of America's most famous cities, New Orleans, Louisiana. At least 1,836 people died in the actual hurricane and in the subsequent floods. Residents by the hundreds of thousands were displaced. Images of Katrina still linger in the American memory of people stranded on rooftops waiting for rescue operations, of the Superdome shelter that became a place of despair as the crisis lingered for many days without effective rescue operations from FEMA and other public agencies, of people screaming for help after days of no response, of floating dead bodies and lost dreams. Like most natural disasters, many people lost everything when the levees were breached on August 29, 2005, and the city was flooded and remained that way for many days and weeks. The floodwaters paralyzed 80% of the city for many weeks. Hurricanes Katrina and Rita caused billions of dollars in damage in 2005. 6 years after Katrina, residents of Louisiana had moved to more than 5,500 cities throughout the United States, most of whom may never return to their home state. Many people went to Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and Atlanta. The disaster forced many to start new lives in new locations. Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma racked up $123 billion in damages. Haiti, January 12, 2010. In one of the worst natural disasters in recent history, a massive 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck Haiti and killed an estimated 300,000 people, destroyed 80% of the capital city of Port-au-Prince, and displaced well over 1 million people. The economic blow to this nation was between $8 to $14 billion. Well over 630,000 people were forced to live in displacement camps, and disease became a major health problem. It was the strongest earthquake that had hit Haiti in 200 years. The epicenter of the earthquake was about 10 miles southwest of Haiti's capital city, Port-au-Prince, and was centered just 6.2 miles below Earth's surface. According to scientists, Haiti is located very close to the boundary where the Caribbean and the North American tectonic plates meet. Major fault lines linked to the plates' movements run right through the country. In the destruction of most of the public buildings, a generation of doctors, nurses, professors, students, civil servants, and engineers were killed in this massive catastrophe. This island nation was dealt a severe blow, wiping out its infrastructure and creating a human tragedy of enormous proportion. Hurricane Irene, August 2010. This massive hurricane swept through the East Coast, wreaking havoc in 9 states, causing $7 billion in damage. The hurricane flooded cotton and tobacco crops in North Carolina, suspended shellfish harvesting in Chesapeake Bay, swept away 35 bridges in Vermont, knocked out power in the region, and kept commuters from their jobs in the greater New York metropolitan area. Peru. Earthquake and seismic activity, 145 occurrences in 2010. Magnitudes 3.5 to 6.7, a very active region. Queensland, Australia, January 2011. Massive flooding caused $7.3 billion in damage. A month later, 180-mile-per-hour Cyclone Yasi struck the coastal town of Cardwell in Australia. New Zealand, February 21, 2011. A massive earthquake hit New Zealand, killing 181 people and left $20 billion in economic damage. Joplin, Missouri, May 22, 2011. A 3/4-mile-wide tornado, one of the biggest and deadliest tornadoes in U.S. history, tore through Joplin and wreaked complete devastation on this town of 50,000 people. A 6-mile swath of the city was mowed down by the powerful force of this deadly twister, packing 200-mile-per-hour winds, an EF5 rated twister, the highest rated. More than 140 people were killed. 1,500 missing, more than 900 were injured, and hundreds were left homeless. Nearly a third of the city was leveled, with power and sewage treatment systems severely damaged. In the wake of the deadly tornado, severe thunderstorms, bursts of hail, and pounding rains kept Joplin in a state of terror. This was the single deadliest U.S. twister in more than 6 decades. The insured losses from Joplin totaled $6.7 billion. A massive 7.2 magnitude earthquake struck eastern Turkey. In the city of Ursus on October 24, 2011, the quake caused 970 buildings to collapse. More than 550 people were initially confirmed dead, and over 1,300 people were injured. The quake lasted for 20 seconds. More than 20 aftershocks shook the area. About 2,000 buildings were destroyed, and authorities declared another 3,700 buildings unfit for habitation. On November 9th, another 5.7 magnitude earthquake hit the region. In the period between these two earthquakes, the region experienced 1,400 aftershocks. Christchurch, New Zealand, December 23, 2011. 2 days before Christmas, the city of Christchurch was hit by 2 powerful 5.8 magnitude tremors. Many people were out shopping when the first quake struck at 1:58 p.m., turning a festive occasion into fear and terror of total disaster. About 70 minutes later, the second 5.8 quake came. The city had experienced a 6.3 magnitude quake in February 2011 that killed 181 people and destroyed a large percentage of the downtown area. New Zealand is another nation that sits on the ring of fire that experience upwards to 15,000 tremors a year. By October of 2011, a record-breaking 89 disasters were declared by President Obama. There were 81 declarations made in all of 2010, so there was a significant increase in 2011. According to the National Climatic Data Center, 2011 had more billion-dollar natural disasters than any year on record. America was hit hard by hurricanes, tornadoes, massive rivers overflowing, and floods, unprecedented triple-digit heat and drought, wildfires, and blizzards. It appears that 2010 was hard hit with natural disasters globally. However, 2011 witnessed an unusual concentration of disasters in the U.S. According to Jeff Masters, a meteorologist who runs Weather Underground, "I'm not used to seeing all these extremes all at once in one year." According to Munich Re, a large multinational that insures insurance companies, the United States had 98 natural disasters during the first 6 months of 2011, and this was about double the average of the 1990s. Also, according to Munich Re, the global bill for natural disasters for the first 6 months of 2011 was $265 billion, with much of that total attributed to the massive earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear meltdown in Japan. This was another indication that the occurrence of natural disasters were on the rise. Weather extremes, abnormal and freak weather patterns are the descriptive terms used to describe this era of natural disasters. In observing these unusual weather patterns, NASA climate scientist Gavin Schmidt stated, "While the hurricanes and tornado outbreaks don't seem to have any clear climate change connection, the heat wave and drought do. Global warming is playing a role in some of the extreme weather patterns, but it's not the sole reason for what we are now experiencing. Scientists are pointing to major solar storms, pole shifting, and the weakening of the Earth's magnetic shield as other reasons for the increase in global natural disasters. Many observers now feel that we must now brace ourselves for these events to occur more often and perhaps with greater intensity. The scope and scale of these disasters have grown, and big insurers, emergency managers, public officials, scientists, and others have held summits on how to better understand and manage extreme events. In 2011, the richer areas of the globe experienced more of the devastation and impact of natural disasters. Thus, the cost of these events will continue to rise, possibly to astronomical levels. In the U.S., each presidential declaration makes the federal government responsible, much of it through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, for at least 75% of the recovery costs of each disaster. More than 75 million Americans live near active earthquake faults. With a growing population, more buildings along coastlines, and larger economies in developed regions, natural disasters will continue to become more costly. More property is in the way to get damaged. In an article entitled Drought, Floods, Food, and Climate, economist Paul Krugman comments on the global warming crisis by reminding us that what we are getting now is a first taste of the disruption, economic and political, that we'll face in a warming world. And given our failure to act on greenhouse gases, there will be much more and much worse to come. Extreme weather patterns will continue to disrupt food production, which will cause food prices to rise. Droughts, flooding, and heat waves will wreak havoc on our world, generating shortages. Japan's triple disaster: earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear meltdown. 3/11. Japan, March 11, 2011. 3/11. A 9.0 magnitude super devastating mega-thrust earthquake struck Japan and initiated a triple disaster: earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear power meltdown. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, this earthquake lifted a span of the ocean floor 50 feet over a span of 180 miles, setting in motion a massive tsunami that hit the shores of Japan shortly after the initial quake with over 10 billion tons of ocean water. The quake lasted an unprecedented 5 minutes. During the week following the quake, there were more than 500 aftershocks, with many of them the size of major earthquakes, one measuring 6.1 magnitude on the Richter scale. Centered off the coast of Honshu at a depth of 17 miles below the Earth's surface, this quake generated a biblical-scale disaster, with the tsunami attacking Japan's northeastern coastal areas. This quake was so powerful it caused Japan's coastline to subside by 1 meter. More than 19,000 people were killed. Thousands were missing, and millions of people were left living in shelters with little food and water near freezing temperatures. Japan's government was completely overwhelmed by the triple impact of the disaster: a massive earthquake, tsunami, and the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant meltdown. For the world and Japan, this became known as 3/11. As the third largest economy in the world and one of the most developed nations on the planet, Japan's moment of extreme catastrophe captured the attention of the collective consciousness of the entire world in a way that other disasters didn't, shaping the economic policies, philosophies, and technological and energy mandates in nations all over the world. The images were profound and reached every corner of the world with astounding speed. As one reporter stated, "There is sheer, surreal force of the images emerging from afflicted zones: cars perched on rooftops, ships sitting in rice paddies, helicopters in a David and Goliath battle against radiation-spewing nuclear reactors." In Germany, the reactions to the nuclear catastrophe led to a pronouncement that the nation would be phasing out its nuclear energy sites over a period of time. Other nations also began to rethink their nuclear policies. Many Japanese citizens began to strongly denounce the use of nuclear energy as a power source. Major magazine covers began to announce the uncertain future of nuclear energy. Nuclear energy: the dream that failed. The Economist, March 2012. Fukushima, March 12, 3:36 p.m. The end of the nuclear age. Der Spiegel magazine, March 2011. The nuclear crisis. Considered as the worst nuclear crisis since the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant became ground zero for 3/11. It was reported that a 46-foot tsunami wave broke through the protective wall of the complex that was located just meters away from the coastline. The defensive flood walls developed to protect the facility were 16 feet in height, 5 meters, while the tsunami wave was greater than 20 feet, or 6 meters in height. Backup generators were behind the walls, but they were not on high ground. Explosions and fires broke out as the nuclear reactors overheated, spilling radiation into the Pacific Ocean, air, and the surrounding landmass. Owned and operated by the Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, TEPCO, the rapidly moving tsunami stormed the protective walls of the nuclear plant, drowning the backup generators, knocking out cooling systems, and causing the complex to leak radiation. 4 major reactors were severely damaged in the catastrophe. 3 reactors went into the meltdown phase. The initial estimate was that it would take 6 to 9 months to bring the crisis under control. Nearly 90,000 people had to be evacuated from the surrounding areas within a 12-mile radius of the nuclear complex. In a sign that the radiation had seeped into the food chain, officials began to discover radiation contamination in spinach, milk, and even tap water. Small amounts of cesium-137, which is cancerous and has a half-life of 30 years, and iodine-131 were detected in milk. 3 months after the disaster, scientists detected radioactive contamination from the plant 400 miles off Japan in the Pacific Ocean. They reported that the levels of concentration were not harmful to humans. Workers in the contaminated facility had to work in protected suits and masks, struggle against explosions, fires, aftershocks, leaks of contaminated water, and equipment breakdowns. This would be an ongoing struggle for months to contain the complex nature of the meltdown. In mid-December, Japan's Prime Minister Yoshihiko Noda stated that the Fukushima nuclear reactors have been brought to a state of cold shutdown. Many nuclear scientists disputed that claim. However, the government was attempting to move forward to the next stage to bring to a closure a significant part of the crisis. In a New York Times report, a global team of experts led by Hitachi estimated that it would take 3 decades to return the site to a greenfield state, a condition safe for human habitation within legal limits of radiation. One of the main producers of nuclear reactors, Toshiba, stated that it would take approximately 10 years. However, by December 2011, Japan was ready to execute a nuke cleanup operation of the areas evacuated during the crisis. The decontamination process, to deal with the radiation fallout contemplated, consisted of 1. Scrubbing down thousands of buildings and the topsoil of the area of radioactive particles. 2. Clean-cutting and scraping forested mountainous areas. The evacuated area covers about 5,200 square miles, about 3% of the land mass of Japan. Thus, this land, as far as the Japanese are concerned, cannot be abandoned. After the Chernobyl nuclear crisis in 1986, the Soviet Union relocated 300,000 people and abandoned the land affected by the crisis, and as of 2012, that land is still uninhabitable. In a crisis of this dimension, the threat of nuclear radiation is severe and can become fatal very quickly. For people near or around the affected areas, the government advice was to please do not go outside, please stay indoors, please close windows and make your homes airtight, don't turn on ventilators, please hang your laundry indoors. I agree with Eugene Robinson, writing in the Washington Post, that nuclear fission is an inherently and uniquely toxic technology. In January 2012, almost a year after the nuclear meltdown, detection of radiation in Japan's food supply illustrated the continued struggle of this nation to contain the deadly nuclear fallout. In the small town of Onami, located about 35 miles northwest of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, unsafe levels of radioactive cesium was detected in samples taken from rice farms. As one reporter observed, an ensuing panic forced the Japanese government to intervene, with promises to test more than 25,000 rice farms in eastern Fukushima Prefecture, where the plant is located. The uproar underscores how, almost a year after a huge earthquake and tsunami, Japan is still struggling to protect its food supply from radioactive contamination. About 160,000 people were evacuated from homes near the plant, an area that may be uninhabitable for many years or even decades. The meltdown released a great deal of radiation into the environment. The abandoned communities, towns and villages where families had lived for centuries are a testimony to the enormous losses suffered by the people. Large rice fields, large businesses, well-built schools, and ancient connections to the land. TEPCO's primary focus was to stabilize the reactors. The company was on course to lose 570 billion yen in the fiscal year ending in 2011. By December 2011, the fear of nuclear power had captured the minds of many people in Japan. The anti-nuclear movement grew larger and stronger as a result of the crisis. As nuclear power operators suspended the operations of their nuclear energy plants for routine maintenance, very few were allowed to resume operations after 3/11. Throughout Japan, concern for public safety prevented the majority of Japan's 54 nuclear reactors from going back online. Only 8 plants were in service as of December 2011. Kansai Electric, KEPCO, a utility that covers the cities of Osaka and Kyoto, had only one of its 11 reactors up and running during December 2011. By March 2012, The Economist reported that 52 of the country's 54 nuclear reactors were offline, their power replaced by old thermal plants working at full capacity. Typhoon Roke. In early September 2011, roughly 6 months after 3/11, Japan was hit with a massive killer typhoon, reportedly the worst in 7 years. Initial news reports stated that 34 people were confirmed dead, 55 people were missing, and thousands were stranded as the typhoon washed away railways, bridges, and roads. This was another clear indication that this nation is subject to a variety of natural disasters that could disrupt and destroy the operation of nuclear power facilities. Tsunami. As stated earlier, the mega-thrust earthquake displaced over 10 billion tons of ocean water and sent giant waves as high as 46 feet or higher, traveling at 500 miles per hour to the northern coastline of Japan. The first waves of the tsunami hit Ofinato, Japan, just 20 minutes after the massive earthquake. There was very little time for the people of that city to escape to safety. The tsunami and floodwaters generated the greatest amount of damage, especially in the destruction of towns and villages and the creation of the nuclear disaster. The massive destructive force of the tsunami simply tore through, ripped apart, and carried away entire coastal towns and villages, creating millions of tons of debris. 1 year after the disaster, the wreckage and debris of the tsunami littered the landscape. As reported by The Economist, an estimated 22.5 million tons of debris scattered across Japan's northeast coast, the equivalent of possibly 20 years of municipal waste. Only 6% of it has been permanently disposed of. Much of the farmland is contaminated with seawater. It will take several years for the salt to be washed out. Approximately 1.5 to 2 million tons of debris dispersed over an area of 2,000 miles by 1,000 miles, roughly the size of California, was swept into the Pacific Ocean and began floating towards the North American west coast. On March 20, 2012, an empty Japanese fishing vessel, the 164-foot Rio Unmero, which the press labeled the Ghost Ship, was spotted drifting off the coast of western Canada and represented part of the first wave of debris generated by the Japanese tsunami of 2011. Economic impact. The disaster caused at least $220 billion in damages in the destruction of towns, villages, infrastructure, and assets. The crisis crippled several industries and left many international firms and investors unwilling to invest in Japan. Prior to the disaster, Japan already had been wrestling with a decade-long battle with deflation and enormous public debt. And with an aging population, this crisis simply exacerbated the core weaknesses of the nation. There was an immediate plunge in stock market values as the third largest economy in the world and the fourth largest trading partner with the United States. Japan's natural disaster crisis quickly spiraled into an economic quagmire. Stock and commodity prices took an immediate hit as the crisis began to unfold. The prices of oil, natural gas, coffee, lumber, and sugar fell on economic concerns that demand would suffer as Japan was knocked flat on its back. With Japanese manufacturing deeply tied to and integrated with the world's two largest economies, America and China, there was deep concern of how long it would take for things to get back to normal. Economic dislocations were of major importance in this scenario. By November 2011, signs of the economic slowdown were evident as the unemployment rate had increased and as the yen rose against the dollar amidst a global economic slowdown. Japan's manufacturers laid off 210,000 workers in October. An earthquake-prone nation with vast nuclear power. Japan is located at the juncture of four tectonic plates, and as a result of this critical geological location, experiences about 20% of the largest earthquakes recorded each year. These are scientific facts that are well known in Japan and throughout the international community. One has to wonder why this nation would have 54 nuclear reactors operating in an active seismic region. Given the potential risks of nuclear fission and radioactive fallout, what motivated the political and business establishment to saturate the geophysically small landmass of Japan with nuclear power? It's clear that energy independence was a key factor, especially since Japan has little or no natural resources. However, given Japan's scientific and technological achievements over the past half-century, I expected this nation to become the leading powerhouse in renewable energy technologies. Observations from The Economist help us to understand what happened to create this trust and belief in nuclear energy power in Japan. Indeed, much of society, excluding an anti-nuclear fringe, happily accepted the safety myth that enabled Japan to cram 54 nuclear reactors on one of the world's most earthquake-prone archipelagos. But if people bought the myth, it was because successive LDP governments, ministries, big business, lobbies, media barons, and university professors sold it to them. Accidents such as 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania in 1979 and Chernobyl in 1986 caused barely a flicker of hesitation over the building of more nuclear plants in Japan. In nuclear power, especially in the scientific process of nuclear fission, there is no such thing as a fail-safe system. Even in the newer designs and other enhancements that scientists and technocrats will state as assurances that another Fukushima Daiichi will not happen, this is not technology we should support as an energy vector in the 21st century and beyond. In addition, all of the nuclear power plants produce nuclear waste that has to be buried somewhere on our planet. Nuclear waste disposal of radioactive byproducts. The consequences of failure are too great, and as a civilization we need to move in other directions. The nuclear crisis in Japan was the final wake-up call to our entire world. The use of nuclear fission technology is simply a bad idea, and we do not want to see the worst-case scenario. In writing for the Washington Post, Eugene Robinson presented a very concise analysis of the nuclear power issue shortly after 3/11. In his article entitled, "Nuclear Power Now Looks More Like a Bargain with the Devil," Robinson reminds us of some very important realities in dealing with nuclear fission-produced energy. The problem with nuclear fission is that the stakes are unimaginably high. We can engineer nuclear power plants so that the chance of a Chernobyl disaster is almost nil, but we can't eliminate it completely, nor can we envision every other kind of potential disaster. And where fission reactors are concerned, the worst-case scenario is so dreadful as to be unthinkable. In the Chernobyl incident, a cloud of radioactive smoke and steam spread contamination across hundreds of square miles. Even after 25 years, a 20-mile radius around the ruined plant remains off-limits and uninhabitable. It appears that enlightenment on this issue, will occur when the world is forced to experience something worse than Fukushima Daiichi. It is my hope that the German initiative to phase out its nuclear power plants will have a measurable impact on other nations around the world to abandon this potentially deadly technology. The risks associated with this technology are not worth the so-called benefits that are derived from the use of nuclear power. As I stated in the chapter on information age technologies, nuclear fusion should be the only potential use of nuclear power in the future. Splitting the atom is a scientific, unholy alliance with the devil, the opposite of good. This longer analysis of Japan and 3/11 was designed to highlight the potential and real connection between natural disasters and their destructive power to destroy nuclear power facilities. World governments simply cannot predict nor fully protect their populations from the unexpected chaos and destruction of natural disasters, and no matter how well designed and newly constructed with the latest technologies nuclear power plants are built, there simply are no fail-safe systems that we can rely on given the unpredictable nature of natural disasters. This civilization has to factor in the explosive, destructive power of natural disasters when considering the use and operation of such potentially harmful technology as nuclear fission. The risks of widespread radioactive fallout in a heavily populated region are just too great to keep such technology in operation. The first year-long struggle in Japan to contain the crisis was an eye-opener and should have been an important wake-up call to the entire world civilization to abandon nuclear fission technology. Natural disasters in early 2012. Indonesia, January 10, 2012, centered 18 miles beneath the ocean floor. A powerful 7.3 magnitude earthquake struck Indonesia. There were no immediate reports of injuries or serious damage. Mexico, January 21, 2012, 6.2 magnitude earthquake. Fiji Islands, January 24, 2012, 6.3 earthquake. No reports of damage or injuries. Japan, March 14, 2012. A 6.8 magnitude earthquake struck the southern coast of the island of Hokkaido and caused a small tsunami. However, there was no major damage or injuries. About 3 hours later, a 6.1 magnitude quake with an epicenter off the coast of Chiba, east of Tokyo, shook buildings in Tokyo. Again, there was no major damage or injuries. According to the Tokyo University Earthquake Research Institute, since the massive disaster of 2011, there have been a 5-fold increase in the number of quakes in the Tokyo metropolitan area. On March 11, 2012, the Japanese people paid special observance and remembrance of the massive earthquake and tsunami 3/11 that killed over 19,000 people. A moment of silence was observed at 2:46 p.m., the exact time when the 9.0 magnitude quake occurred on that fateful day in 2011. Mexico, Mexico City, March 21, 2012. A 7.4 magnitude earthquake with an epicenter 200 miles southeast of the capital lasted over 1 minute but had minimal damage. The quake originated 12 miles underground, and this presented no threat of a tsunami. There were no fatalities. Ring of fire. Illinois and Kansas, February 29, 2012. Midwest twisters devastated 2 towns, killing at least 10 people. One eyewitness stated, "Every time the tornado hit a building, you could see it exploding. Funnel clouds drop out of a darkened sky, ripping apart everything in its path, pulling trees out of the ground, tearing buildings apart, swooping mobile homes and cars up into the air." Indonesia, April 11, 2012. 2 earthquakes struck Indonesia in a double punch to this nation still recovering from the 2004 mega disaster, 9.1 to 9.3 magnitude quake and tsunami that killed 170,000 people. The first quake measured 8.6 magnitude and was centered 20 miles, 33 kilometers beneath the ocean floor. The distance from the Aceh province, the location where the 2004 quake and tsunami killed 170,000 people, was about 269 miles, 434 kilometers. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center in Hawaii issued a tsunami watch for many nations in the region, including South Africa, Singapore, Indonesia, India, Sri Lanka, Australia, Bangladesh, Malaysia, and others. Only small tsunami waves hit the shores of Indonesia. However, an 8.2 magnitude aftershock came shortly thereafter and sent people scrambling again for safety as another tsunami warning was issued. No major tsunami was generated from either of these quakes due to the type and nature of these earthquakes. These two quakes were considered strike-slip quakes, which, according to scientists, cause a horizontal tearing movement that does not displace the seabed, causing vibrations in the sea instead. The so-called mega-thrust earthquakes cause the seabed to rise vertically, propelling large volumes of water to generate huge waves traveling at enormous speeds. Mega-thrust quakes are more powerful and much more destructive. Japan's 9.0 magnitude megathrust quake in 2011 was 4 times more powerful than Indonesia's first 8.6 magnitude strike-slip quake, and the 2004 9.1 to 9.3 magnitude Indian Ocean megathrust quake was 5 times more powerful. This was another quake situated in the Ring of Fire. Mexico, April 11, 2012. A strong 6.5 magnitude earthquake hit the western state of Michoacán in Mexico with an epicenter 238 miles, 384 kilometers west-southwest of Mexico City. There was no major damage and no tsunami warning. It was the third earthquake to hit Mexico in less than a month. As one observer has stated, the Ring of Fire has awakened, and this will mean more frequent earthquakes and volcano activity throughout the ring. Pacific Island nation of Vanuatu, April 15, 2012. A 6.5 magnitude earthquake struck this island nation 9:05 a.m. in the morning. The epicenter was 91 miles southeast of Port Vila, Vanuatu. At a depth of 5.4 miles below the surface, there were no reports of damage or injuries. This was another quake situated in the Ring of Fire. Midwest United States, Oklahoma, Kansas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska, North Texas, and Iowa. Weekend of April 14, 2012. News reports indicated that at least 122 tornadoes tore through the Midwest section of the United States. 5 people died in Woodward, Oklahoma, and there was heavy damage throughout the region. Estimated cost was $283 million. More than 24 people were injured. Chile, April 16, 2012. A strong 6.7 magnitude earthquake hit the South American country of Chile. At a depth of 23 miles, 37 kilometers, the quake's epicenter was 26 miles, 42 kilometers northeast of Valparaiso. The earthquake lasted for nearly 1 minute. There were no reports of major damage. However, the quake knocked out power and telephone service in various parts of Santiago. One 72-year-old man died of a heart attack during the event, but no other injuries were reported. Chile is another vulnerable region in the Pacific Ring of Fire and is the subject of many earthquake events. The country had just experienced a 7.1 magnitude earthquake on March 25, 2012, which was considered the strongest event since a massive quake struck the coastal country in 2010. In 2010, an 8.8 magnitude quake generated a tsunami that wiped out the city of Constitucion. Papua New Guinea, April 17, 2012. A 7.0 magnitude quake hit the northeast of Papua New Guinea at 5:13 p.m. but did not cause any major damage or injuries. The quake originated at a depth of 201 kilometers, about 88 miles, 141 kilometers north of the city of Lae. A tsunami warning was not issued. This is another region of the Pacific Ring of Fire that is subject to frequently strong earthquakes. Mexico City, Mexico, April 18, 2012. The Popocatépetl volcano, located about 40 miles southeast of Mexico City, spewed glowing rock from its crater and shot a burst of ash into the sky. The mountainous peak stands 17,886 feet, 5,450 meters, and is located within the system of the Pacific Ring of Fire. This was another early mild event indicating the awakening of the Ring of Fire. Superstorm Sandy, October of 2012. The 2012 Atlantic hurricane season produced one of the most devastating storm systems in recent memory. Superstorm Sandy. Before making landfall in the United States on October 29th, Hurricane Sandy swept through the Caribbean, generating tremendous damage. Jamaica, Haiti, Cuba, Dominican Republic, the Bahamas, and Puerto Rico were all struck by the massive power of this storm system. In Haiti, 54 people died and over 200,000 people were made homeless by floodwaters. Cuba suffered 11 deaths and nearly $2 billion in damages. 2 people were reported dead in the Bahamas amid an estimated $300 million in damage. The nature of the storm changed as it traveled through the islands and throughout the eastern seaboard of the United States. Superstorm Sandy was reclassified from a hurricane to a non-tropical storm to a post-tropical cyclone, until the media finally began calling it a superstorm. Sandy hit landfall in the U.S. on October 29th, packing winds of up to 90 miles an hour and flood tides as high as 13 feet. Spanning nearly 1,000 miles from Florida to the border with Canada, Sandy left millions of people without power, shut down entire mass transit systems in city after city, tore through coastal towns with heavy winds, rain, and flooding, caused the cancellation of thousands of flights worldwide, transformed some of Atlantic City's streets into rivers, flooded Lower Manhattan, shut down Wall Street for 2 days, and would ultimately have an impact on 24 states. In West Virginia, western Maryland, and southern Virginia, the storm system generated severe snowstorms and 2 feet of snow in the mountainous areas. The states of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania were severely damaged during this massive storm. The total death toll, as of November 3rd, was 113 people in 9 states, with most of the deaths occurring in New York, 48, New Jersey, 24, and Pennsylvania, 14. The superstorm made its appearance in the U.S. 8 days prior to the historic November presidential elections. Climate change and extreme natural disasters had not been part of the presidential debates. However, Superstorm Sandy delivered a resounding and forceful message to the candidates that global warming and extreme weather patterns are real. It was an urgent reminder of how unprepared we are in the face of colossal natural disasters, and that our politics need to give strong consideration to the significance of climate change and other types of natural catastrophes. According to ECOCAT, a catastrophic risk management consulting firm, estimated damages caused by Superstorm Sandy would be $30 to $50 billion. These were preliminary numbers presented in early November. Only time will tell how much this disaster would really cost the nation. The Arab Spring. Other unknown and sudden unpredictable events and developments, such as the Arab Spring that began in late December 2010 and early 2011, brought massive change to a region of the world that had been dominated by mostly long-standing autocratic rulers. Much of the economic and political catalysts that began the wave of protests and demonstrations throughout much of North Africa and the Middle East was captured and organized on the Internet. What began in Tunisia with the street vendor Mohamed Bouazizi, who set himself on fire on December 17, 2010, to protest the economic hardship, rising prices, government corruption, and cronyism, quickly grew into a multi-nation revolution against the old guard. Social media was an invaluable tool used to organize the civil resistance against the entrenched powers of each nation. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube helped to organize the strikes, demonstrations, marches, and rallies that shook the foundations of the Arab world and uprooted decades of entrenched autocratic governments. After 10 months of struggle and revolution, 4 leaders had been overthrown. President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali of Tunisia, President Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, and President Ali Abdullah Saleh of Yemen. The struggle continued in Syria and elsewhere, but the massive change had taken place, and the spirit of the revolution had reached the masses throughout the Middle East and North Africa. Constitutional reforms were implemented in Morocco and Jordan in response to the protests and demonstrations. In Kuwait, Oman, and Lebanon, governmental changes were made to accommodate the new era. Indeed, a new era was born in this troubled region of the world in 2011, and as Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton stated in an interview, we're facing an Arab awakening that nobody could have imagined and few predicted just a few years ago. Moreover, in 2012, we have yet to see the end result of this massive development. There are many unknown factors brewing deep within the political and economic upheaval that produced the Arab awakening in 2011. Only time will tell what the end result will be after such a massive upheaval. We can expect economic X factors to play a role in future periods. Summary Analysis. The surprise attacks of 9/11 generated major disruptions and gave rise to a laundry list of uncertainties. However, like natural disasters, these types of events are totally unpredictable and uncertain in the depth of their devastation. For many people, including myself, the initial shock of 9/11 would last for nearly a month, particularly as media coverage kept the details and images fresh in our minds. This was clearly different for Americans, and given the continued threats of bioterrorism, anthrax mailings, etc., and other forms of potential terrorist assaults, the entire modern world moved into a whole new arena of 21st century high-tech warfare. We would now have to deal firmly with the other face of the information age revolution, the potential use of many new high-tech weapons and the spread of lethal, man-made biochemical diseases. But despite the harsh realities of the 21st century terrorist economic X factor, we are now forced to live with these potential threats the same way we adjusted to the long 45-year Cold War of the 20th century. And like the economic X factor of natural disasters, one simply has to be aware that these events could happen any time. This is clearly not a perfect world. However, I think mankind has made it worse than it should be. The global ripple effects that occurred on the day and day after 9/11 were significant. In Japan, the Nikkei fell almost 7%. In Korea, the stock market plunged 12%, and in most European and Latin American markets, similar declines were recorded. With most Asian economies depending on exports for most of their growth, global economic contraction simply made it a difficult period. America launched 2 wars, spent trillions of dollars, and instituted a global manhunt for Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda global network. After 10 years and 2 presidents, on May 2, 2011, Osama bin Laden was shot and killed by Navy SEAL commandos on a sprawling compound 35 miles from Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan. Under the direction of President Barack Obama, the body of bin Laden was placed in a helicopter, flown to a ship, and buried at sea. This brought to an end one of the most expensive, expansive, and exhaustive manhunts in the history of modern civilization. However, this would not remove the threat of the economic X factor of terrorist attacks. This remains an unpredictable reality similar to natural disasters. Of all the economic X factors, the most critical and vastly unpredictable reality is the sudden emergence of natural disasters. What were presented in this chapter are reasons for giving greater consideration to the economic implications of natural disasters. Our knowledge is limited concerning the occurrence of these events. However, we must come to an understanding that we have entered a period of increased activity of a wide range of possible calamities. For instance, it appears that the Ring of Fire has awakened to the production of much larger events, stronger earthquakes, and perhaps much stronger volcanic eruptions in the not-too-distant future. While scientists can point to global warming as a catalyst for extreme weather patterns, there is no clear connection or inference to be made in the case of earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and the dreaded tsunamis. There are a combination of factors coming together to produce this period of extreme weather and overall extreme natural disasters, and this is what this civilization needs to come to terms with, that in 2012, whether we believe in Mayan prophecy or not, our world has entered a period of frequent and extreme natural disasters. As I stated earlier in the chapter, the nuclear energy crisis in Japan was a wake-up call to the entire world to abandon this technology, but many nations will not heed the call. The addiction to nuclear fission is almost similar to the addiction to oil, both of which should be phased out in the 21st century. Moreover, what is perfectly clear to me is that this world does not need any more nuclear power plants that could conceivably be the unexpected target of an unpredictable natural disaster. It is certain that we do not have control over how, when, and where these disasters will strike next, but can make preventative decisions about what we build and place in the path of the destructive forces of nature. The emergence of Superstorm Sandy on the shores of the U.S. as Americans were preparing to go to the polls to vote for their next president was a clear sign that we need leadership that understands the science and reality of global warming and extreme weather patterns. There must be enlightened leadership for this century of turmoil, or we, as a species, will not survive. Our refusal to end the age of oil, nuclear fission power, and other failed policies will only accelerate our demise. These are no longer philosophical choices, they are hard scientific alternatives. We will either move with a total commitment to clean energy and scientific salvation, or stay addicted to the death of oil and nuclear fission and live in ignorance. Finally, I take the position that the more people are prepared for potential disasters or economic reversal, economic chaos, the better we will be able to survive as a community, nation, or civilization. The massive destruction of natural disasters can change our realities very quickly, and we must now be in constant preparation for these events. It is better to be prepared and nothing happens than to be unprepared in the face of calamity.